bottles from the same country. The first one tastes like a gentle summer afternoon, honeyed, fruity, smooth as silk. The other tastes like someone set a peat bog on fire and handed you the smoke. How is that even possible? Because where whiskey is made in Scotland doesn't just influence the flavor, it determines it, completely, dramatically. And if you don't understand Scotland's whiskey regions, you're essentially buying bottles blind, guessing, gambling, and probably wasting money on something that was never right for you in the first place. Officially, Scotland has 5 whiskey regions, but there's a 6th. One the rulebook refuses to recognize, even though every serious whiskey drinker treats it as completely real. We'll get to that, but first, a little history, because you can't understand where Scotch whiskey is going without knowing where it came from. The earliest written record of distillation in Scotland dates to 1494. A friar named John Gore, an order of Malt, and the first official mention to aqua vitae, the water of life. But distillation almost certainly arrived before that, believed to have travelled from Ireland to Scotland via Islay, carried by monks crossing the narrow channel between the two countries. For centuries, whiskey was made illegally, hidden from tax collectors in farmsteads and coastal coves across the Highlands. It wasn't until the Excise Act of 1823 that legal distillation became genuinely viable, and that single piece of legislation triggered a wave of licensed distilleries that began Scotland's transformation into the whiskey capital of the world. The regions that exist today are the product of geography, climate, and history. Some were powerhouses that collapsed and rebuilt. Others have produced continuously for 200 years. Understanding them means understanding Scotland itself. Let's go through them one by one. The Highlands is Scotland's largest whiskey region by a long way, stretching from just north of Glasgow all the way to Thurso in the far north, where Scotland runs out of land and surrenders to the sea. It accounts for around 25% of all whiskey produced in Scotland. And because of that sheer scale, the Highlands is the most diverse region on this list. If someone asks what does a Highland whiskey taste like, the honest answer is it depends entirely on where in the Highlands it was made. Think of it like asking what European food tastes like. French, Italian, Norwegian, they're all European and they're nothing alike. In the north, rich, full-bodied and sweet. Dalmore is dense and luxurious, dried fruit, chocolate, citrus. Glenmorangie goes lighter, floral, elegant, approachable. In the east, Glendronach, packed with sherry, cask, raisins and spice. In the south, Aberfeldy, honeyed and gentled, the golden dram. On the west coast, Oban, where the mainland meets the sea. Salt, a hint of peat and fruit that taste like Atlantic weather. What to expect? Enormous diversity. Glenmorangie 10 for floral elegance. Dalmore 12 for rich luxury. Oban 14 for coastal complexity. Now the next region has more distilleries than some countries have breweries, and it produces more than half of all Scotland's single malt. Region 2, Speyside. Follow the River Spey northeast through Scotland. Along that river and its tributaries, you'll find over 60 active distilleries in a relatively small area, more per square mile than anywhere else on Earth. This is Speyside, the undisputed capital of Scotch whisky. Speyside produces over 60% of Scotland's total single malt output. Glenfiddich is one of the world's best-selling single malts. Glenlivet was the first distillery to take a license under the 1823 Excise Act. The Macallan commands some of the highest prices in the category. The town of Dufftown alone has 7 distilleries, hence the local saying, Rome was built on 7 hills. Dufftown was built on 7 stills. The Speyside flavor profile is what most people imagine when they think of Scotch. Sweet, fruity, elegant. Vanilla and apple from American oak and the cool Spey water. Dried fruit and gentle spice. These are the whiskies you hand to someone who has never tried Scotch before. Approachable, complex, rarely confrontational. But within that framework there's a real range. The Macallan in sherry cask is rich and dark. Christmas cake, bright orange. Glenfiddich is lighter and pear-driven. Glenfarclas is deeper and richer, offering extraordinary quality at prices that feel almost unfair. What to expect? Sweetness, fruit, elegance. Glenfiddich 12 to start. Glenfarclas 15, where you're ready for something deeper. Next we head south, to a region that's the quietest in Scotland, makes the most delicate whiskey in Scotland, and it's almost completely overlooked. That ends now. Region 3, the Lowlands. The lowlands cover the southern half of Scotland. Flatter, more agricultural, closer to England. But what the region lacks in quantity, it makes up for with a style unlike anything else in Scotland. Lowland whiskies are light. Genuinely, almost startlingly light. Unpeated, soft on the palate, built around grass, cream, honeysuckle and gentle toast. If Islay whiskey is a thunderstorm, Lowland whiskey is a Sunday morning in a garden. What makes the lowlands historically unique is triple distillation. While most Scotch is distilled twice, Lowlands Distillery once ran their spirit through the still a third time, stripping out heavier compounds and producing something unusually clean and delicate. Auchentoshan in Glasgow is the only distillery still doing this across its entire range today. The region suffered badly during the 20th century consolidation. Many distilleries closed and never reopened. But a quiet revival is underway with newer producers like King's Barnes and Borders bringing fresh energy to a region at risk of becoming a footnote. What to expect? Elegant simplicity. Auchentoshan 3 wood for sherry-kissed light whiskey. Glen Kinchie 12 for grassy gentle Scotch at its most approachable. Now we go somewhere with a history so dramatic it sounds like fiction. A town that was once the whiskey capital of the world and then lost almost everything. Region 4, Campbelltown. Campbelltown sits on the tip of a long peninsula on Scotland's west coast, geographically closer to Belfast than to Edinburgh, surrounded by sea on 3 sides. At its peak in the 19th century, it had over 34 distilleries in operation. It was called the whiskey capital of the world. Then it collapsed. Better transport links gave southern markets access to Highland distilleries. Quality dropped as producers chased volume over craft. The market turned away. Distillery after distillery closed. By the mid-20th century, only 2 remained. But Campbelltown survived. And Springbank, the distillery that held the flame, has become one of the most respected names in the whiskey worldwide. It malts its own barley, distills its own spirit, and bottles everything on site. Entirely family-owned. Producing 3 completely different whiskey styles: lightly peated Springbank, heavily peated Longrow, and unpeated Hazelburn, from one set of stills. That is a remarkable achievement. Campbelltown whiskey carries a briny, oily coastal depth that is genuinely hard to find elsewhere. Salt and dried fruit, smoke and toffee, a texture that rewards patience. What to expect? Complexity and maritime character. Springbank 10 is an essential bottle. Longrow, red for smoke alongside the brine. And now the island, the one that built its entire reputation on the most remarkable flavor in whiskey. Region 5, Islay. Islay, 25 miles long, 3,000 people. The highest distillery density in the world relative to population. And the flavor profile so distinctive that people either become obsessed with it or never go back. Distillation is believed to have arrived in Scotland from Ireland to Islay as early as the 13th century, making this small island arguably the birthplace of Scotch whisky itself. Islay is famous for peat. The island sits on vast ancient peat bogs, and when distilleries burn that peat to dry the malted barley, the smoke infuses the grain with phenols, the compounds responsible for smoke, iodine, seaweed, and that famous medicinal character. Arbec is explosive and intensely sweet beneath the smoke. Lafroig is the most medicinal of all, the one that genuinely divides rooms. Lagavulin is richer, rounder, more refined. Smoke wrapped in dried fruit and a finish that goes on forever. But here's what surprises most people. Not all Islay whiskey smokes. Bruichladdich Classic Laddie is completely unpeated, fresh, coastal, closer to a lowland malt. Bunnahabhain is mostly unpeated, nutty and sherried. Caol Ila is smoked with elegance rather than force. Islay is not a one-note island. It is a world unto itself. What to expect? Start with Bowmore 12 or Caol Ila 12 for approachable Islay. Then, when you're ready, Ardbeg 10 or Lafroig 10. There's no going back. And now the 6th region, the one that officially doesn't exist. and the one that some argue produces Scotland's most characterful whisky. Region 6. The Islands. The Scotch Whisky Association officially recognizes 5 regions. The islands are not among them. Legally, they fall under the Highlands. But calling Talisker Highland whisky is like calling the Atlantic Ocean a large lake. Technically, defensively, practically absurd. Scotland has nearly 800 islands. Only a handful produce whisky, but those that do punch well above their weight. Orkney, battered by the North Sea at Scotland's northern tip, is home to Highland Park, regularly cited as one of the world's great all-round whiskies. Honeyed, lightly, smoky, floral and balanced. Its peat comes from local heather bogs, giving the smoke a sweetness quiet unlike Isla's maritime bite. Skye is home to Talisker, the largest island producer. Peppery, explosive, intensely maritime. Robert Louis Stevenson called it the king of drinks. Arran, with a distillery established only in 1995, has earned serious critical acclaim for a whisky that's fruity, elegant, and distinctly coastal. Jura sits somewhere between Islay peat and Highland fruit. Tobermory Mull makes both unpeated and heavily peated expressions from the same stills. What unites island whiskies is attitude shaped by isolation, brutal weather, and water that travels over ancient rock before it ever reaches the still. That unofficial status doesn't diminish them. If anything, it makes them feel more honest. What to expect? Highland Park 12 for honeyed complexity, Talisker 10 for pepper and fire, Arran 10 for coastal elegance without aggression. 5 official regions. One that everyone uses anyway, and between them, a flavor universe that takes a lifetime to properly explore. The regions of Scotland are not just labels on a map, they are flavor guides. They tell you what the land tastes like, what the climate does to a spirit over time, and what a distillery has decided to be, often over centuries of production. Once you understand them, you stop buying blind. You start making choices. You start discovering whiskey that's actually right for you. So, which region speaks to you? The sweetness of Speyside? The fire of Islay? The wild, unofficial edge of the islands? What's your favorite whiskey? Drop it in the comments. And be sure to look at our previous video about whiskey myths you might just be still believing.